you so much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy day for you to talk about student learning and how we can get students to really think about their learning. And just a little bit more about me. I am the Director of Assessment here at our College of Pharmacy, so I spend a lot of time trying to identify students who are struggling in the curriculum or who we anticipate will struggle as they go through the curriculum, and try to come up with ways to help them perform better. And so I have a lot of students in my office throughout the day just trying to help them to study better and to understand their learning process better. But also I'm a faculty member, so I teach a pharmacology course here in the college. And so as the course coordinator, I also get to see lots of students and try to help them on individual exams. So when it comes to struggling students, I know I'm not the only one who have these students in my office, and that's probably one of the reasons why you're attending today, is because you have some of these same questions about how can we help students better? How can we remediate those struggling students and get them caught up so that they can be successful as they move forward in the curriculum and even move into careers. So I figure that we are pretty similar in that students will come to our office after an exam and say, I was really surprised by my low score. I spent a lot of time studying for this exam. In fact, I studied sooner for this one than I normally do for other exams, and I spent more time on it, and I've done everything that my friends do to study, and they still make better grades than me. I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And so that is really the goal of the session today, is how do we address those students and how can we help to identify maybe where their thinking is going wrong and how we can help them. So our objectives today are first to define metacognition, because it's that student who's not able to really think about their learning that's showing us they don't have very good metacognitive skills. So we'll look at the definition of that fancy educational term, and then we'll talk about the importance of metacognition with remediation. So when we're trying to help those struggling students, how can we help them by identifying their metacognitive skills? And then thirdly, I believe that ExamSoft has some specific tools that we can use as faculty and as administrators to help students think about their thinking and then make plans for improving their performance on exams. And lastly, I want you to leave with something. I want you to get your money's worth today. And so I have some tools for you that I want you to take and adapt and use as your own to really help remediate students. And so if you want to go ahead and look at that handout, it is on the control panel. So where you see questions that you can type in and your audio controls, somewhere under that you should see handouts and one, and there's a PDF located there, Metacognitive Toolkit. So you can go ahead and open that up and download it. We'll refer back to it as we go throughout the session. So first, let's define what metacognition is. One of the most accepted definitions of this word is knowledge and cognition about the cognitive phenomena. And honestly, that's still a pretty complicated definition, so I like to simplify it to thinking about thinking. And this is how this term is often described in the literature. We're trying to get students to think about their thinking. And of course, this is a very higher order cognition and different type of thinking skill, because not everyone can do this, but we definitely want to develop this metacognition in our students. And there's really three main skills that come with metacognition. The first is planning. So the student first has to know how to study, where to find the resources that they need, and really plan out their process. Once they do that, they'll need to monitor their thinking. So how are they progressing through what they're studying? Are they managing their time well? Are they starting soon enough? Are they progressing through the material at an appropriate pace? And then also monitoring what questions they have remaining on the subject. So that second piece is really key for the students, because at this point now they'll be taking the exam, and the exam is going to be what helps them to evaluate how they did. So it will help them identify strengths and weaknesses in their studying and in the assignments that they've done, but also get them to reflect on what didn't work, because if I didn't get the grade that I wanted, why am I in this position and how can I change? So then that leads back to planning and making new plans for how to study and how to prepare for exams, monitoring, and then evaluating. So this is a constant cycle here of self-assessment that if a student is going to really understand how they're thinking and how they're learning, they're going to have to do these 3 stages. So why is metacognition so important? Honestly, it's what guides our students' learning strategies, because if they can think about their thinking and they know what they know and they know what they don't know, that's going to help them to figure out learning strategies moving forward. And hopefully that will lead to improved student performance on exams and on assignments and even on licensing exams once they leave our programs. But it's also important because this is how students can develop critical thinking. And I think you would agree with me that we all want our students to have this critical thinking. It's that higher order thinking where they can problem solve and they can reason. And they're not just asking or answering multiple choice questions, but they're really critically thinking about what they're learning, and we want that for our students. And we want that while they're in our program. But we also want that when they're leaving our program, because we're not going to be there to hold their hands from here on out. They will be practicing on their own and having their own careers where they can't always come back and ask us questions as their professors. So we want them to develop this skill of lifelong learning because we're not going to always be there to help them. And again, I teach in the area of pharmacy, and medicine changes every day. There's a new drug being developed or a new indication, new trials that are coming out. And so we have to be teaching our students how to learn for themselves because the material is changing and we're not going to always be there to help them. So metacognition is important for development of all 3 of these skills. And this is not the reason to be concerned with metacognition, but it is definitely something that can help us to think about it. But a lot of accreditation standards now will mention metacognition and this concept of lifelong learning and critical thinking. We're going to have to be able to assess that in our students. And so that's why I think there's some tools in ExamSoft that will be able to help us do that, especially if accreditation standards are requiring that. So now the question is probably, is it even possible to teach this skill? Can we really get students to think about their learning and enhance their metacognition? And there's literature that supports that the answer to this question is yes. If we carefully design teaching activities and even carefully design our assessments, we can actually influence how students acquire this skill of metacognition. So a couple of things as far as teaching methods go, and then we'll jump into the meat, which is really the assessment methods. But when it comes to teaching methods, we can help them to develop this skill of metacognition and critical thinking. One of the first things we can do is provide learning objectives to them, because if we tell them what is required and what we want them to know from the material, then we are helping them to plan out their thinking and plan out how to best study this material. And linking your information that you're teaching to prior knowledge that the student already knows is really going to help them link these different thought processes and content together so that they're able to learn and move forward with new information building upon what they already know. So anytime you can say, you probably learned this in X course last year, or to Y course that was a prerequisite for this course. If you can help draw their knowledge into your course, they're going to be able to critically think a little bit better. Next is outline the studying process for them. And you might say, well, Ashley, I'm teaching adults. They should already know how to study. Once they get to me, studying is not something that I should have to teach them. But the programs that you're you're teaching in are probably different than anything that they've had before, and your content is new to them. And so outlining the studying process and really coaching them through the best way to learn your material is going to be helpful to these novice students because they are not experts like you are in your content. So we need to model this behavior of how to study and how to think critically when we're teaching. Chunking material is another way to enhance metacognition, and that's when you're teaching to divide the material up into different chunks so that they're seeing very clearly where they learn one piece of information and then build on that with the next chunk of information. So you do that with increasing difficulty. So you can use intentional questioning to help them walk from point A to point B. And you're modeling that critical thinking for them because you are the expert. So they need to hear what your expert thinking is on that subject. So these are all just some teaching methods that if you use these in your classroom, it's really going to help students on those first two steps of the assessment cycle to plan and really monitor how they're learning. But we need them to evaluate how they're doing as well, the third piece of that cycle, and that's where some of our assessment methods come into play. And we're going to go through 4 examples today that ExamSoft can provide to us, but a couple of things just in general that can help enhance metacognition, or any type of checklist or rubric that you can give to the students beforehand, because this will help them monitor their progress as they are completing an assignment and see if they are meeting the standards that you've set out for them. And then also, using a questionnaire while they're taking an exam or immediately after they finish an exam can get them to think about errors in their thinking and where they went wrong on certain items and maybe why that was. So we're going to explore these 4 areas in ExamSoft to really get students to think about their thinking. So we'll go through each one of these individually, and we will start with exam reviews. So a couple of different ways that you can review an exam with a student once they've completed your assessment. So you can do this in a group. And this can be a large group. You could do it with the entire class, or something that I really do more often is with individual students in my office. So after they have taken the exam, coming down and sitting with me one-on-one to try to figure out where they might have gone wrong during the exam. Now with the ExamSoft features, you can choose to do a delayed review where there's a little bit of time that elapses before they actually see their score and see what they missed, or you can do it immediately after the exam. So as soon as they hit upload, it immediately will send a score back and show them which items they got incorrectly. I will note here that there is some evidence in the literature that delays feedback could be beneficial to their learning because it gives them a little bit of time to pause and to think back over what they've studied and what was on the exam, and then do some self-assessment. But either way, we have delayed and immediate feedback options that are available through ExamSoft. Now, rationales, I think, are really key. And that might be a box that as you're writing a new exam question, you just skip over. So when you write a new item, on the left-hand column of each of those exam items, you're going to see a box for rationales. And that's where you would tell the students A was correct because, B, C, and D were wrong because. And it shows them, again, your expert thinking and models critical thinking for them so that they can better understand where their thinking went wrong. So rationales are really a key when it comes to exam reviews. Now these are great, and students love seeing what they do on the exam, but unless you have them reflect on their score and why it is the way it is, it's not going to be that beneficial to them because we have to get them to think about their learning. And so I think reflection is the next step, that once they review their performance, we've got to get them to think about certain questions. So I've listed a couple here for you that they they need to think about what their assumptions were about that item, because maybe those were wrong, and that's actually the reason why they got the item wrong. Or maybe they didn't realize there was an alternative way to approach that question. In their mind, there was a single direct line to get to that answer, and they never considered other ways to approach the question. But teaching them that usually there's more than one way to get to the right answer, and modeling that behavior for them can enhance metacognitive skills. And then lastly, asking them what piece of knowledge they were missing when it came to answering that question. Maybe they just absolutely did not study that item. That would be important for them to know so that they don't miss something like that for the next exam. So I often force students to do some reflection before they come into my office to talk about their performance. I want them to already be thinking about these questions. Now here I want to share a tool that Jessica Belknap from Pellissippi Community College created, and it is in that handout. It's the very last page of that toolkit if you're able to open that PDF. But she has students fill this out as they're going through an exam review to try to pinpoint any types of trends of why students are getting items incorrect. So, of course, there's some things just at the top that they can self-assess. Maybe they just really did not prepare for the exam, and that would account for their low grade. Or maybe they have really high test anxiety, and we would help that student in a different way. But for each item that the student misses, they're supposed to choose why they think they missed that item. Did they misread it? Did they just not study it? It was a complete knowledge deficit for them. Did they read too much into the question and they overthought it? Maybe they just guessed wrong. But it gives you lots of different options, and of course the students can fill in an other box if they think there's something extra. But as they're going through each missed item, if their check marks align in one of these rows, then that's a different way that you would remediate the student. If most of the items they miss are in that first row of misreading the question, then now that they know that, they can slow down and actually read through the question and recheck their work. But if they are marking that maybe they changed their answer, they had it right the first time, but changed it after they overthought the question, then that's a different way to help the student, to say, go with your gut. Don't change any answers once you go through there. So this tool I really like, and I appreciate that Jessica is letting me share this with you today. Her and her colleagues developed this and use it to help struggling students after an exam, because you'll remediate them differently depending on how they answer these questions. So I hope you found that helpful. And again, that is the last page in the toolkit PDF that you can find in the control panel under handouts. So what does this look like in ExamSoft? I want you to be able to use these functions. So just really quickly, when you post an assessment, there's going to be a question here that asks you, do you want to do a review? And you've got two options at this point. You can do it immediately after the assessment, or you can wait a little bit of time. So if you choose to do it immediately after the assessment, you're going to have to put in some sort of password so that the students can access it, and then give a time limit. And I would be careful to give a short time limit. You don't want them to be sitting there for hours and hours looking at what they did wrong, but a reasonable amount of time that they could sit through and look at what they got wrong. And then two other options there on the right that you can enable is you can just show them just the ones that they got wrong. So even though it was a 50-point test, they're only going to see the 5 items that they got wrong. So that is a great option for you, because then they don't take as long to review the exam. And then show rationale. That's where I told you if you had filled in that box when you created the exam questions, it will model your expert thinking to the student so that they know why A was right and why all of the other ones were wrong. Now, something that I would caution when it comes to an immediate review is I'm going to show you what it looks like from the student perspective, but it highlights the answer choices either red or green if they got them right or wrong. And so if your students were sitting really close to each other when they were taking the exam, it might be easy for a student beside them who has not uploaded their exam, they're still taking it, to look over and see what was marked as the green answer. So just something for you to think about when it comes to logistics, if you're going to have students in the same room who are reviewing their exam and might be sitting beside someone who is still taking the exam. Now, if you want to wait and do a delayed review, this looks very similar, except now you're going to have a start time. So maybe it's a couple of days later that you want the students to review the exam. But again, you're going to have internet for this one, whereas before, when you do it immediately after the assessment, it doesn't require that internet connection. Something to think about if you know what room you want to set up this review in. And then you still have the options to only show the incorrect answers or to show the rationale. So something to think about for both of these exam reviews is that this does not account for any type of change that you do in your scoring. So any adjustments afterwards, if you throw an item out or if you give credit for 2 answers, this will not be shown to the students. So that can be a little bit concerning because students might see that their grade is low, and then after you make some adjustments, their grade actually comes up. But it's something to just make them aware of, that the score that they see right after the exam is going to be the lowest that there is. But if you made a mistake and accidentally marked a wrong answer as correct, have them rest assured you'll go back and make that correction. But any of those little mistakes, the students would be able to see during the review. So it does not account for any type of adjustments. And the reason why that is it's just like when you post an exam for students. During my ExamSoft training, they always said it's like a package. When you create the exam, you package it up, put tape on the box, and send it to the students. And there's no way to send it back to catch that little typo that you let slip through because you've already sent it out. This is the same way. It's going to send what you've marked as the right answers, and it sends the rationales that you've already typed in to the students to download, and so there's no way to recall that back and change what your answer choice was if you accidentally marked it wrong. So that's what it looks like when you're setting up the exam. Let's see what it looks like for the student after they take the exam. Now, you're going to automatically see this picture is not high quality, and that is because I'm taking it with my cell phone because there is no way for me to screenshot within a secure exam and make it look pretty for you here. So I think it's another good feature of ExamSoft that there's no way for screenshotting to happen when you're doing an exam review. So this would be what the student saw, that they got 8 out of 10 points on the exam. So an 80%, they would type in whatever the password was to access their scores. And then this looks like what they would see if they got the item correct. So you'll notice just the green line there as D being the correct answer. But look at the bottom part here, instructor rationale. So this is where I've come back and said, here's the right answer and here's why that's the right answer. Now, if a student got the item wrong, you do see that red. So the student picked A, which was the wrong answer. C should have been correct. And again, that rationale is provided at the bottom there for them. So again, just kind of think through logistics here as far as if you want to do this immediately after the exam or if you want to wait a couple of days. How I use these most often is for practice quizzes. So with an exam review, I will have the students take a practice quiz, and then immediately after the practice quiz, they can review it. And my rationales are pretty lengthy on these because I'm wanting to teach them. If they got the item wrong, then here's how they should have approached that question. And so I do these just for students who are interested. It's not required, but each week of my course, I will post a quiz for them to take, and I post it twice. So I actually duplicate the exam so they can take it the first time and just see how they do. And then if they want to take it a second time, so that would be a second exam, I name it practice quiz 2, and once they take 1, then they can take practice quiz 2. And typically they usually wait until the day before or the night before an exam, because then they're really testing themselves and making sure that they've learned the material. So a lot of different ways to use exam reviews. So that was the first one. Now we're going to go into the Strengths and Opportunities report, because that's another way that we can get our students to think about their thinking and their learning. Now, you've probably seen this report before. It's so useful, and my students absolutely love it. In fact, they're usually knocking on my door saying, "When do we get our red, yellow, and green report card? I want to know how I did on the exam." So a couple of things just to think about on this one is your categories should be really useful. And so, of course, to get this beautiful report, you're going to have to tag each one of your items to certain categories. And so I would make sure that if you're giving them feedback and we're wanting to help students to learn better, then these categories need to be something that the students care about. Now, there's a lot of metrics that I'm tracking just as a director of assessment in the college, but I'm not necessarily going to release it to students on their report card because it's not meaningful feedback to them. They don't know what that means. But in my course, this is my Pharmacology 2 course, I do a couple of different things for them. I always do Bloom's taxonomy, because that's going to show them, are they getting the memorization questions, but they're missing the higher order critical thinking skill questions, or vice versa? Where are we going wrong? Because that's going to change the way I help them remediate and improve in the course. Another thing that I usually release to them are course objectives. So for my pharmacology course, you'll see a couple that are listed here: adverse effects, drug interactions, mechanisms of action. That's going to help them study for the next exam. If they know that they are doing really poorly in adverse effects, then when it comes time for the next exam, they should be focusing on adverse effects and memorizing those. So I always do course objectives. And then the other item that I always do is whatever disease state topic we're talking about on that exam. So maybe it's hypertension, heart failure, and antiarrhythmics. I want them to know if those 3 topics were tested on the exam, how did they perform in each one of those? Because when it comes time for the comprehensive final, that will easily tell them, well, I really didn't do great on the antiarrhythmic section. I probably should spend more time on it, but my hypertension section looked really good, so I don't have to spend as much time there. So use categories that would be really beneficial to the students. The second tip here is about consistent mapping. So if your college or your school, whatever it is, if you use consistent mapping across courses, so if everyone's looking at Bloom's taxonomy, then there are longitudinal reports that you can run for the students to see not only how they're performing in your class, but how they're performing across all of the classes when it comes to Bloom's taxonomy. Or maybe it's certain disease states. Maybe they're really weak in cardiovascular, but they're wonderful in pulmonary. So if your college or your school is able to agree on some topics that everyone can map items to, that is an even more powerful tool to use in helping to remediate the struggling students. But again, if we're not requiring reflection on these, students often will not even open up the report, or they'll just look at their grade and see how they compared to the class, and that will be the end of it. So something I do is I require students who perform poorly on the exam to come to my office after the exam, and they are supposed to have already looked at their report card and answer some questions for me. They should come prepared to tell me what went well on the exam and why it went well. So if they did great in the hypertension section, why do you think you did so good on the hypertension topic? But they've got to answer the second question too. What can be improved? So it's usually whatever the red lights are on their report cards, but how are they going to do it? Why did it go wrong, and what is the plan for improvement? And That's where I can help them as the course coordinator or even as a director of assessment. If we know where they are performing poorly in, I'm better able to help them to know where to study. So again, you can see here just on some of the course objectives, the student performance is that dark blue or the navy diamond that's on each of these charts, whereas the class average is that lighter blue color. So they can very clearly see that this student performed the lowest in monitoring. And so for the next exam, they would want to focus a little bit more on the topic of monitoring. So what does this look like in ExamSoft? The place that I normally go and look for this when a student comes to my office is I find the exams. You would click on assessments and then exam taker activity. And that little table icon underneath actions will bring you directly to that student's report card. And that's, to me, the fastest way that I can pull it up when they come to my office. Now, once I click on that icon, it's going to ask me what I want to show the students. Do I want to pick the categories or do I just want to show everything? And I always hit select new categories because I want to decide which ones I'm showing them. Because again, I'm tracking some things that I might not want them to see. For instance, if multiple faculty are teaching on one exam, I don't really want them to know that the class average for my part was an 85, whereas the class average for another faculty member might have been a 70. I don't want them to see that, and so I would hit select categories here and then choose the ones that I show them and that I think would be meaningful to them. Now, when you're actually releasing this report to the students, again, once you've found the exam, you'll go under the Report and Scoring tab and click on Release Exam Taker Results. And this will open up another page that you have a couple of options to decide on what you want to show the students. So I'm going to zoom into each of these pieces separately so that we can see them a little bit bigger. The first that you need to decide on is the category performance. Again, that was just like before. I would click on the magnifying glass here to show the students only the categories that I want them to see. And then you can choose how you want to display the score to them. And if there were any adjustments made, you can indicate that here. Also under assessment, you can show them the exact questions that they missed. I usually don't do that. We keep our items secure for the most part in the college, but if you wanted to release all of the questions to them afterwards, you absolutely can do that. And again, you can choose to show them the rationale. So when they're reviewing their exam, they know why they got something wrong. And a couple of other things here, of course, their name. You can only show them the wrong answers if you choose to release all of the items to them. And then show them some statistics just so they can see where they rank in the class and just how the class did overall. So that was the Strengths and Opportunities report. Now, this third tool that I believe can enhance metacognition is the student's notes and feedback box. And if you are saying, I have never ever heard of this before, it might be because it's not turned on yet in your portal. So if you are interested in this after looking at it, you can talk with your account manager and they can turn on that feature for you. But I think it's pretty neat, and I want to explain a couple of reasons why I think you should try it with your students. So the first is it is a box that students can type into during the exam, kind of like an electronic scratch sheet. So it can allow them to monitor their thinking while they're in the exam, so they can think out loud. Sometimes students just need to type out their thoughts, and they're eventually going to work themselves to the right answer, but they just need to say it out loud. But of course you can't do that during an exam, so they're going to type it out loud so that they can monitor their thinking during the exam. The second one is it's really a tool for reflection during the exam review, because once the students are coming to your office and they get a low score on the exam and they want to know what they can do better, you can pull up the notes that they've typed in and see their thought process during the exam to identify where they went wrong in their thinking. Because I'm sure you've had this same experience with me. Student will come in, they're reviewing their exam, and they say, well, I don't know why I got that one wrong. I know that. I know that's the answer, and I don't understand what I was thinking during the exam. Well, if they've typed in their notes and how they were thinking at the moment, then it's easy for us to go back and say, okay, here's what you were thinking apparently. Now let's figure out where your thinking was wrong and how we can correct that before the next exam. So it's great for the student, but the third one here is great for us too, because it gives me a lot of feedback on exam questions. So sometimes students catch typos, or they'll catch where I might really have two answers to that question. So they're able to type into that box and let me know that there really might be something wrong with that item. So when you're interpreting your item statistics, of course, those numbers don't tell us everything. So if we go back and we see that half of the class commented on this item that there might be two right answers, and then we also go to our item stats and it appears that there could be two right answers, then I'm going to be able to make some decisions better. So it can add to feedback for the instructor. But then it also could be a place where you could do a little bit of research. So I do a lot of research on metacognition, and if you are interested in this, please shoot me an email afterwards, because I would really be interested in collaborating. But this could be a place where we have students mark if they think they got that item incorrect or not. And we could go back and look and see, they thought that they got this item wrong, and now I'm going to look at their exam scores, and yes, they did get that item wrong. So they're able to identify or not identify when they get an item right or wrong. So now let's look and see what this looks like in ExamSoft. So when you are creating an exam, you have lots of options there on the left-hand panel of your screen for options to enable. So you'll notice right here at the bottom, if you have this feature turned on, and if you don't, talk to your account manager. But if you have it turned on, you just easily click the box. And here's the difference in if you just click notes or if you click notes and question feedback. So the notes button just opens up that box for students to type into. If you also click the box for question feedback, then the student can identify to you that they want you to see what they wrote. They want you to see their comment. Because sometimes they're just thinking out loud and they don't need me to look at it. They're just wanting to type out their thoughts. But sometimes if they feel like maybe there's two right answers, they would want to flag that question for me to see afterwards. So I usually open up both of these and just explain to the students, if they're just writing to themselves, then don't check the box for feedback. But if they want me to look at it or they have a question that I need to see, then go ahead and check that box for question feedback. So here's what it looks like to the student. If you notice at the bottom, this little box is opened and they can type in whatever they want if they're just thinking out loud. And then there's the little check box underneath where they can mark it for me to look at their feedback and review. So just another example of this, students might just say, well, I'm totally guessing. I have no idea what this means. And that's fine, but they didn't mark it for me to review afterwards, so that's good. Now, that's the student view and what they see when they're taking the exam, but let's look at the faculty view as well. So how would you come back and look at your comments from the students? So again, once you get within an exam, you can look at the reporting and scoring tab, and there's a little feature there for question notes and feedback. Once you click on that, you can decide if you want to see what the exam taker's name was, or if you would prefer just to review that blindly. And then if you click the box for just feedback requested, then only the ones that have checked that box for me to look at it would see it. And then I always put to have the question and answer choices provided to me, because if not, I have no clue what they're talking about. So once you hit View Report, you will get some questions from students. So this one, the question there is at the top. What is a reversal agent for unfractionated heparin? It's a fill-in-the-blank item. And you could see the possible choices that I was anticipating they would type in. But you can see some students in that first column, that's what they wrote in. The second column there, it was their result. So did they actually get it right, or did they get it wrong? And you could see that first student got it wrong, and they typed in vitamin K because that was what was in parentheses. So that was their answer that was wrong. But they did request feedback. That's what's there in the third column, that X. Now, the second student, they didn't request that I read this, but here you can see they're just thinking out loud. They're trying to work themselves to the right answer. I can tell you where it comes from. I can tell you how it works. I can tell you how much to use, and it begins with a P. I just cannot for the life of me remember the whole word. It's right on the tip of my brain. So they were trying to work themselves to the right answer, and it looks like they eventually did because they got the item right. But they didn't request that I see that feedback because they were just thinking out loud. Now the third student here, they ask, would you rather us put protamine sulfate or just protamine? Well, of course, I would have accepted either, and I already have those as accepted choices in my answer. But maybe that's feedback for me for next year to say just provide the first word or provide the full name of the drug. But that gives me some feedback because there must have been a little bit of confusion on what I was looking for there. So a lot of stuff that you can see from the student notes and feedback section from the faculty side. And you can also export that to Excel. So those are reports that you can easily keep up with and manipulate however you would like to see how many students had questions about a certain item. Okay, so we've been through exam reviews, strengths and opportunities report. We just looked at the notes and feedback box. So next we'll look at rubrics because I believe that's another tool that can encourage students to think about their thinking. Rubrics are great because they could capture some of those reflection exercises. I've told you that for a lot of these reports, unless we're having the students think about it, they're not going to be that helpful to them. So if you require some sort of reflection on their report card afterwards, you could use the rubrics function of ExamSoft for the students to turn in their reflection to you. Also, if you distribute the rubric at the beginning of the assignment, then that's going to help the students to know what's required of them and help them to monitor their thinking as they're going through the assignment. But you're probably going to have to train them on how to use the rubric. It's not necessarily intuitive to students, so showing them the first time would be really helpful. And then you'll have to write descriptors out for each level of the rubric. And so being just very careful when you write those and making sure that you're including components that students could follow so that as they're doing the assignment, they can easily see if they're meeting the criteria you're looking for. Now, rubrics are not always easy to write, so I recommend that you use them like with yourself. You try it out first, and then give it to a colleague to try it out. Even let some students use it, and then make your revisions before you actually release it to use for a real exam with your class. But let's look and see what rubrics look like from the ExamSoft side. So I have an example rubric from our college, and don't worry, we're going to zoom in to just these first three columns here, but you can see that we're assessing 6 different areas, and then students can perform somewhere between exceeds expectations all the way down to they did not even attempt to answer that. So I'm blowing it up just a little bit so you can see what some of these descriptors are. Because if a student sees this as they're preparing their assignment, then they can read, and this one, for instance, on patient assessment skills, it says provides complete assessment for primary problem, including etiology, severity, onset, and therapeutic objective. Well, if they had prepared their entire assignment and had left out severity and onset, by using the rubric, they could go back through and add that into their material. So it is a cue to show them what is required, and they can evaluate if they have met that or not. Another example here is a monitoring plan. Did they monitor for desired and undesired endpoints? Well, usually they remember the undesired ones, but sometimes they forget the desired outcomes of that treatment. So using a rubric can really help the students to monitor their progression on the assignment and then evaluate it before they even turn it in. So you, as the instructor, get higher quality works from your students. So we've just been through these 4 different features or tools in ExamSoft that can help your students to enhance their metacognitive skills, because it's going to help them plan their learning, monitor how they're doing, and then lastly, evaluate their performance so that we can help them in this remediation process to improve for the future. Okay, before we finish up, let's look real quickly at the Metacognition Toolkit that I've provided to you. Again, that's located in your control panel, and it's underneath handouts. There's a PDF for you. And I want to mention Adam and Melissa. I consider both of these to be gurus in metacognition, and we've created this toolkit together so that if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, these are the resources here for you. So if you see on page 1, we've just got some ideas for you when it comes to teaching metacognition. And also, if you want to perform research in metacognition, again, please let me know, because I would love to collaborate with you. But a couple of things there on how to research metacognitive skills. There's also a reference list for you. It's where I've gotten most of my references today for this presentation. So if you want to read more, there's a lot of great resources for you. And then next, we've given you just some activities that we use in our classrooms. So this is one that you could use just for a regular assignment with a student, that after you do a certain topic, you would ask the student to indicate their overall understanding of that content from today's class. So they would mark on that line from 0 to 100 and specify any topics that they felt like they really didn't understand from class, and then what they're going to do to improve their understanding of that concept or topic. So that's something you can use each day in your classroom to get your students to think about what they're learning. Another one here would be on a quiz that you can have the students assess really how sure they are that they got that item right or wrong on an exam or on a quiz or some sort of weekly practice quiz. The third one here, this is on page 4 of your handout, or the Metacognitive Toolkit, is something that I have students complete while they're taking an exam. So I asked them to identify a few items that they think they got wrong on the exam and tell me why they think that is. Was it just it was confusing or difficult to understand? Was it too detailed? Did they just not study it? Why did they get it wrong? And they usually write me in an explanation there of, I just really didn't study that material. I didn't think it was important, or I ran out of time. And then I asked them a few things just about how they think they did on the exam overall and how they do on multiple choice exams versus short answer exams. But this is a good tool to then go back with a student when they're reviewing the exam and they're sitting in your office to see how well were they able to identify what they knew and what they did not know. So at this point, I'm happy to take a few more questions if there's any. But again, thank you guys for hanging with me. And I hope you learned something today about metacognition and got some ideas about how to help remediate your students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley. What a wonderful presentation. We do already have a couple of questions lined up, but I will go ahead and just remind everybody that if you do have questions, now is the time to post them in the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. Should be on the right-hand side of your screen. You can type those in, and then I will read them off and give Ashley an opportunity to respond. So the first question is, do the students' notes appear next the respective question on the review or the exam review?
No. So if students are using the notes and feedback, that does not show up during the exam review afterwards. So they would have to come back into your office afterwards to see what they had typed in at that point. They'll be able to see the rationale that you as the instructor have provided, but they would not be able to see their own notes that they have typed in. I'm not sure if that is a plan for the new version of test or not, but I do think that's a great idea because it would be nice for them to see their thoughts versus your thoughts right beside them. But currently that is not available.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Ashley. I honestly don't know if that's something that is going to be included in the new Soft Test V12 version, but I can definitely check into it. Also, we had an additional question stating that an attendee had used the notes feature in the past, but the students did not like that it took up a third of the screen. That's feedback that we've gotten before as well. I can check into both. If you have questions about whether or not that will be available in Soft Test V12, please let me know, info@examsoft.com, or you can reach out to your account manager as well. Next question, moving on, is how many students do you have in your particular course?
I have 120 students in each class here in the College of Pharmacy.
Okay, and then another question we have is, what is the performance or grade cutoff you use to require student participation and remediation?
That's a good question, and honestly, it really changes depending on the exam content or even on the student. Usually when I'm looking through my summary report, which is the report that you can run at the end of the exam, and it provides the lower 27% of your class, I'm definitely looking at their performance if it's less than a 70, and will require them to come in and meet with me. But especially if they're in the 60s or even less than 50, which hopefully that does not happen often, but they're definitely going to be required to come in. But if it's even a student that they might have made, above a 70 on that exam, but they've been struggling before, and maybe they made right at a 70 or 71, I still might ask them to come in and meet with me just because I know that they've been struggling in the past, and I want to encourage them in their progress, but continue to be there to help them move forward. So it's not necessarily a certain cut point, but it would depend on the exam and depend on the students and how they've performed earlier in the course.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, when using the Strengths and Opportunities report, do you release this to everyone or only the students that performed poorly?
When it comes to the Strengths and Opportunities report, I release that after every exam to every student. Now, again, we don't release the actual questions. We just release categories so students can see how they performed overall in comparison to the class, but then I choose which categories to open up to them, and that's where I normally open Bloom's taxonomy, my course objectives, and also the topics that were covered on that exam. So every single student gets that, and that's after every single exam.
Okay, next question is, are you using ExamSoft for summative or formative purposes?
Both, actually. So we, of course, use it formatively in our courses, but we also use it summatively as final exams in courses, but then we also do progression exams at the end of each year that we are collecting data from students as well on their performance before they move on to the next year. So we're using them both summatively and formatively.
Great. Next question is, when performing an immediate or delayed review on ExamSoft, is there a way to turn off the scoring? I would think that scores are not really important when reviewing content and can interfere with the review itself.
No, there's not a way to do that currently. And I do agree that that would be really nice, because I'm sure your students are like mine. They're very concerned with that number and just get stuck on that number. But as of right now, and Stephanie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but their score will immediately come up afterwards, and then they're able to go in and see the individual items, either all of them on the exam or just the ones that they missed if you decided to check that box.
I am not aware of a way to turn the scores off either, Ashley, but I can check into that. I know the asker of that question, so I can follow up with you. Next question is, you mentioned that you keep exams closed within the college. If so, then how do you use the review tool?
So I use the review tool for practice exams that are on questions that I do want to release out. We have had some instructors that will do the review and release the questions. It's just that you can never use those questions again. So most people keep those closed. I keep them closed within my class, except I do the review for practice quizzes so that students can get a feel for what the exam will be like and what types of questions I plan to ask, and get some feedback on how they're doing before the real exam.
Okay, and do you manage to give feedback to all students on a one-on-one basis, or do you identify students who have not done so well and just invite those students to talk to you?
So it's really the ones that are not performing well that I'm going to require to meet with me. And that's, a handful for each exam. Now, I'm always available for anyone who wants to come by and review their exam and look at it a little bit more in depth, because sometimes if a student really, really wanted an A and they made a low B, then they want to come in and see how they did. So I'm totally open to that, and I want anyone to come in that wants to, but it will be required of students who are low performers on the exam.
Okay, next question is, who selects the Bloom's taxonomy levels? You as the director of assessment or instructors? Can this be done after the exam is administered to students but before the report is released?
Okay, let me answer that second question first, because that's a wonderful question. All of the category coding can be done after you administer the exam but before you give the report card. So that is perfectly fine. You can add those categories at any time and then release the report card to them. The way that we decide on the coding, and it's different for each course, but the faculty member really decides what level that item was written at. So in my course, we do group exam item reviews. So before we give an exam, all of the instructors in my course, because it is a team talk course, will come together, and together we will review the items, and we will decide if it's a level 1, 2, or 3 when it comes to Bloom's taxonomy. And we chose not to use the full 6 levels of Bloom's because it gets a little hard to differentiate between a 3 and a 4 and between a 5 and a 6. And so we collapse it into 3 different areas. The first being just plain memorization. The second would be that it required some sort of memorization, but you've applied at least one step of thinking to get to the right answer. And then the third level, or the highest level of Bloom's, would be that, yes, you memorized some sort of fact, but it required at least 2 steps of thinking and bringing information together before you could answer that question. So when we do our item reviews just with the faculty who are teaching in that course, usually the person who wrote the item will come in and say, I think this is a level 3 question. And we're not all content experts on whatever that item is written on. So we will have the faculty member say, okay, explain to me how the student would get to that answer. And maybe they would think that it's a level 3. It's a really hard critical thinking question. But once they explain it, everyone agrees, well, it's probably only a level 2. And so at that point, we would code that with what the group decided as being the level 2.
Great, thank you. Next question is, do all of the faculty in your program use this process that you've spoken about and the features, and how do you convince them to do that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we don't have across the board that everyone is using these features. We, of course, show them this and let them know that it's available to them, but everyone has the choice of whether they want to use it or not. But I think one of the things that's really powerful is showing the results, like the Strengths and Opportunities report, and how you help a student differently knowing that information. Because previously we would just know they made a 65 out of 100. And the class average was an 82. Well, you would remediate them differently if you know that they're getting all the memorization questions right, but they're missing all the critical thinking questions. Or they did great in the hypertension section, but missed all of the antiarrhythmic questions. So I think it's powerful to show faculty what these reports could look like and how it could help them in their conversations and creating remediation plans with students. Yes, it does take a little bit more time to go through and code these items, but when you're able to show the result of that to faculty, they'll see the value in the extra time that it takes to create those categories.
Great. This is going to be the last question that we have time for, folks. I know there's several more questions, but they just keep coming, and we've got to wrap it up. So last question that we're going to be able to take online, and then we can follow up offline for anybody who has a pressing question for Ashley. Ashley, you mentioned that in the review the students do not see changes, questions that are dropped, or for which multiple answers are accepted. Can students review exams again, i.e. pass the initial review period, and see changes in the final grade?
As far as I'm aware, that could not be done in a secure environment with these exam reviews, because even though you do the delayed review, it's still that original package that you sent to the student's computer that said what the right and wrong answers were initially. So the only other way that I'm aware of that you would be able to do a review afterwards is if they come in individually to someone's office and actually look and see those changes that were made. So as of right now, there would not be a mechanism to do that through the secure review, even if it is a delayed review.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up there. Thank you so much, Ashley, for a wonderful presentation. This was very informative. And thank you to everybody who took time out of your day to attend this afternoon. We really appreciate you being here. We know it's a busy time of year. Everybody's already getting ready for the fall semester. Just a couple of quick notes before you close out. Yes, this webinar has been recorded. If you have attended today or even registered, we will be sending you a link to the recording in the next few days, a link to a downloadable PDF version of the slide deck will also be available for you to have access to. And also, as you close out of the GoToWebinar control panel, you will get a quick pop-up with a 5-question survey. We would really appreciate you providing feedback on this presentation so that we can continue to provide great content at any upcoming webinars. Thank you again to everybody. We truly appreciate your presence, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.